my 背景. So some of the things that are really important is how I grew up. All right, so I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. So I played sports, I grew my hair long, I joined a heavy metal rock band. This is how I grew up. And then this is the environment in which I grew up. So even though I'm ethnically Chinese and I speak fluent Chinese, you can see when the environment in which I grew up was basically all, in this case, all white Caucasian Americans. And in this case, there are also no Chinese people. So I always make a joke, and this joke works in China, that if I wanted a girlfriend, she would have blonde hair and blue eyes. So, and then I talk about my marriage. It's like you said, Chinese people care about personal things. So the more personal thing, don't get offended by personal questions, but the more personal things you're willing to share, that's all a plus, I think, deepening the relationship. So my wife is from Hunan province. She's actually from a really small place in China, but I would also say she's from, Chairman Mao's hometown, 毛主席的老家. And then might also say something like 香妹子. The women from Hunan are like really spicy. We call them 香妹子. In fact, when I say my wife is from Hunan, my Chinese counterpart might say 香妹子, and then I would immediately understand what that meant. One of the things that is also important, and you'll hear Chinese people who meet each other the first time, this is kind of like the first question they're asked. 你哪里人? Where are you from? Right? Because they're doing exactly, David, what you just said during your introduction. You're trying to find areas of common connection. So when I do my native place, 我老家, I would say 我老家是江苏淮安. Okay, that's because that's where my father was. That's where my grandfather was. All right, and then I would say 周恩来的老家. Right, so you always want to try to not only find those common connections, because maybe somebody's from Jiangsu or someone from Hunan, but you also want to start that reciprocity, that you know a little bit about, key Chinese figures, where they're from. Chairman Mao is from Hunan, Zhou Enlai is from Huai'an. And then, of course, in this case, I talk about my book. Right? So the Chinese honeymoon period is kind of what you experience when you're working with any partner or any person in China, at least in the initial stage. And while everything looks glamorous, like on these kind of wedding photos in the background, 但是没你想的那么容易. It always looks great. It's almost like China. They talk about China's hardware and software, right? Glamorous cities, high-speed rail, all of that is hardware, but the software of how Chinese people think may be slightly different. So you could be disappointed in the contrast too. And the lesson that I want my readers and the people that I'm working with to really understand is knowing how to speak Chinese doesn't mean you know what to say in Chinese.